Insulin resistance is a medical condition finally getting the attention it deserves. So, what do you need to know about it, and what can you do about it if you do have it? So, one of the great things about the recent attention to insulin resistance is it's something we can address before it develops into type 2 diabetes. And if we can diagnose insulin resistance, address it, and reverse it, then people might not ever even get into type 2 diabetes, and therefore will drastically improve their health. So before we get started and before we just kind of delve into this, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that little red subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss when I release a new video. And when you click the notification bell, select all so you're notified of all videos. So some of the issues in regards to insulin resistance are as follows. Now, insulin resistance is fairly prevalent, unfortunately. So not sure if you know about this type of data, but there's this type of data that's referred to as the NHANES data back in 2006, and it showed a 34% prevalence in the US alone, and that's most likely similar across all parts of the world, Canada included, Europe, everywhere. So unfortunately, and it's since this 2006 data came out, this NHANES data, it's unfortunately been increasing ever since then. So for those who are obese particularly, the prevalence is over 50% in adolescents and over 70% in obese women. Now, this is a big issue as insulin resistance is linked to increased risk of type 2 diabetes, like I mentioned, cancer, neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease, as well as conditions such as heart disease and hypertension, among others. And it may not be a clear kind of cause and effect, but insulin resistance certainly increases the risk of and association with said conditions. And ultimately, if there's any chance that it's related to any of these conditions, you want to get your risk down as low as possible. So you may be asking, how does it start? How does insulin resistance start, and where do we get it from? Basically, insulin is critical, and we need insulin in our bodies to help us regulate our sugar, which is basically the glucose that runs through our bloodstream when we eat food. So essentially, as we eat, our glucose goes up, which causes our insulin to go up to bring the glucose down. So it's a homeostatic mechanism that keeps things in line and in order. The problems come in when we keep eating and eating and eating, and as a result, insulin has to keep elevating to deal with the excessive glucose levels, and this keeps insulin chronically high, which is also referred to as hyperinsulinemia. This is not a good thing. So at some point, the body sort of kind of gives up, throws up the white flag in surrender, as it just can't keep up with the workload, and therefore our cells can no longer respond to insulin as well as before. So as a result, glucose levels begin to rise quite high, and they remain quite high, and also along with this, the insulin levels rise and stay high, which is a very, very dangerous condition when both these are high. So as I mentioned, this can lead to high blood pressure, as I mentioned, also referred to as hypertension, can lead to type 2 diabetes, as well as all the other conditions I mentioned above. Now, the underlying cause of insulin resistance, well, the science actually shows that it's a fatty acid accumulation in our muscle cells and liver cells. At that, you might be thinking, okay, well, then I should just avoid a high-fat diet because it's going to lead to insulin resistance. But hold on a second here. When we look at the evidence, it does show that a high saturated fat diet is associated with insulin resistance. But as usual, this is a high fat, high carb, high calorie diet. So in that setting, that type of diet can be related to insulin resistance. But you know what else is? High sugar, high fructose in the setting of a high calorie diet. So when we look at something like a low carb or a low carb, high fat, not high calorie diet, there is actually no evidence that this particular diet is related to insulin resistance. In fact, there's evidence that this type of diet, a low carb, a high fat diet that is not excessive in calories, there's evidence that this type of diet can actually treat and dramatically improve insulin resistance. So having an accumulation of fatty acids, as I mentioned a minute ago, in your muscle and your liver cells is not a result of eating too much fat. That's too simplistic, and the body doesn't work that way. It's caloric excess of any kind and increased sugar, fructose, and potentially increased polyunsaturated fatty acids from vegetable oils. Now, we won't get into those. We can deal with those at another time, but potentially the vegetable oils can lead to an issue in our adipocytes, which is our fat cells, causing us to become insulin resistant and gain weight. So we can deal with that on another video, but a low carb, high fat, high saturated fat diet shows absolutely no evidence of causing insulin resistance. Now, in regards to the symptoms, there aren't really that many symptoms, just like with type 2 diabetes. It is, however, associated with abdominal obesity and visceral fat adiposity. So basically the fat that's accumulated around your midsection, also referred to as the peritoneum. So a good tool, so a simple tool that you can do at home to measure this and to measure if you're potentially at risk for insulin resistance and ultimately type 2 diabetes, is to measure the height to waist ratio. So basically what you do is you measure your waist at the belly button with your abdomen fully relaxed, then you divide that by your height. Now just make sure you measure both in the same units, for instance inches or centimeters. Now ideally this ratio should be less than 0.5, meaning your waist should be less than half your height. So for instance, if your height is 70 inches, then your waist should be less than 35 inches. Now, if your ratio is above 0.5, there's a good chance that you have more visceral fat accumulation around your midsection than you should, and you are overweight and are exceeding your personal fat threshold, something that I discussed in a previous video. Now, there are also blood tests that you can ask your doctor for, such as a fasting triglycerides test, as high triglycerides can be associated with metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. You want this test to be below 150, but ideally you want it to be below 100. Also checking your fasting lipids, specifically your triglyceride to HDL ratio is a good one, as this is linearly related to adipocyte size. So basically your fat cell size and how over fat you are. There's like a linear relationship between the higher that ratio is, the more over fat you are and the bigger your fat cells are. Now you want this ratio to be less than 2, this triglyceride to HDL ratio. And another good measure is a fasting insulin, which you want to be below 5, but ideally 3 or below. Fasting glucose test is not the best measure because once your glucose is too high, you are really over your personal fat threshold and insulin resistant and either diabetic or close to it. So how do we address it? How do we address this issue? Well, basically, the way to address it is to reverse the things that caused it. So caloric excess and abdominal obesity, like I talked about, cause it, so you try to reverse it. Excessive sugar and fructose cause it, so try to eliminate or reduce sugar and fructose consumption. Okay, so basically whatever causes the condition, we're just gonna basically try to reverse the condition and do the opposite. So that's where following a low carb, high fat, moderate protein diet that is not in a caloric excess, which most of these diets aren't because they're naturally satiating, can be very beneficial in treating and reversing insulin resistance. So basically we wanna follow either a low carb, ketogenic, or a carnivore diet, okay? Now, I'm not saying that this is the only diet that's gonna be effective, as there's others that actually are and can effectively reverse and address insulin resistance, but you wanna basically find a diet that's gonna work for you, you're gonna enjoy the meals, allows you to feel full and satiated, allows you to do time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, which addresses insulin resistance very well, and ultimately one that you can stick to long-term, because that's really the key. Are you enjoying it? Are you feeling satiated? Are you feeling full? Are you enjoying the meals? Are you able to stick to this long-term? And if you aren't able to do any of that, it doesn't matter how good the diet may be, if you can't follow it, you can't stick to it, who cares? It's not going to work. So this type of diet, this low carb, high fat, moderate protein diet, low carb, keto, carnivore, whatever you want to call it, this has worked for so many people and the evidence supports it. Now, if you want to learn how to get started on this, visit my website at the link below in the description and download my 8 strategies for lasting fat loss and optimal health. It's a guide that I've put together, and as part of it, you'll receive a free 20-minute online consultation to help you get started and get on the right track. So download that free guide and email and notify us for consultation. Now, I really hope that this was helpful on what insulin resistance is, how to address it if you have it, or prevent it so you never get it. Now, if you think anyone may benefit from this, please consider sharing it anywhere on social media, as you may help someone resolve their health issue or at a minimum, drastically improve it. So thanks again for watching. If you'd like this, please click the thumbs up button. And as mentioned earlier, please remember to subscribe and click the notification bell and select all. And as always, if you have ideas for future videos or any questions for me at all, please comment below, as this helps me to know what videos to create and what you'd like to learn. So keep it locked in here on my channel, and I look forward to coming to you in the next video.